Life rarely announces when it is about to change. Most transformations begin quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the space between one thought and the next, in that subtle moment when something inside you realizes that repeating the same patterns no longer feels sustainable. Many people reach this point not because everything has gone wrong, but because nothing truly changes. Days continue to move forward, responsibilities are met, routines are followed, yet a silent question keeps returning. Why does life seem to respond in the same way, no matter how much effort or intention is applied? For years, manifestation has been presented as an act of desire, visualization, or willpower, as if reality were something to be persuaded through insistence. But beneath this surface narrative lies a deeper mechanism, one that has less to do with asking the universe for outcomes and far more to do with the internal state from which you experience existence. Reality does not merely react to what you want. It reflects what you consistently embody. This is where the idea of manifestation becomes less mystical and more precise, less about hope and more about coherence. At its core, quantum manifestation is not an external practice but an internal reorientation. It begins with the recognition that consciousness is not passive. It is not simply observing life unfold. It is actively shaping perception, interpretation, and response. Every emotion you return to, every belief you rehearse, every internal narrative you accept as truth subtly informs how the world meets you. Over time, these inner patterns solidify into expectations, and expectations quietly guide choices, behaviors, and reactions, creating outcomes that feel inevitable even when they are not. This introduction is not an invitation to force positivity or deny difficulty. It is an invitation to look more honestly at the invisible structures guiding your experience. When you understand how consciousness conditions reality, influence replaces struggle. Events no longer feel random or punitive, but intelligible, connected to an internal order that can be examined and gradually reshaped. From this perspective, life stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts revealing itself as something that responds to who you are becoming. The quantum nature of reality and consciousness. There is a subtle moment in human awareness when the idea of reality as something fixed begins to dissolve. It often arrives not through sudden revelation, but through quiet observation. You notice patterns repeating despite changes in environment, effort, or intention. You see similar emotional outcomes emerging from different circumstances, as if life were following an internal script rather than reacting to external conditions. This is the point where the concept of a purely objective reality starts to feel incomplete, and the role of consciousness becomes impossible to ignore. From a quantum perspective, reality is not a solid structure waiting to be navigated. It behaves more like a field of probabilities that collapses into experience through interaction. What matters here is not physics as an academic discipline, but the metaphor it offers for understanding lived experience. Just as particles behave differently when observed, human experience shifts depending on the state of awareness through which it is perceived. Consciousness does not merely witness events, it participates in shaping how those events are experienced, interpreted, and integrated. The mind tends to assume that life unfolds independently and that internal reactions are secondary. Yet in practice, perception precedes meaning, and meaning precedes action. The same event can generate radically different realities depending on the internal framework applied to it. One person experiences a challenge as confirmation of limitation, while another experiences the same challenge as an invitation to expansion. The external situation remains unchanged, but the internal state alters the trajectory that follows. This difference is not philosophical abstraction. It is the mechanism through which consciousness influences outcomes. At the center of this process lies the nervous system, which functions as an interpreter between stimulus and response. Over time, it learns which emotional states are familiar and which are foreign. Familiar states, even uncomfortable ones, are treated as safe because they are known. This creates a powerful tendency to return to habitual emotional patterns, regardless of intention. The body remembers before the mind decides, and this memory quietly guides perception and behavior. When consciousness operates from these conditioned patterns, reality appears repetitive. The same types of relationships form, The same obstacles arise, the same disappointments surface under different names. This repetition is often mistaken for fate or bad luck, but it is more accurately understood as coherence. Life aligns with the dominant internal state because that state shapes attention, expectation, and reaction. What feels like chance is often consistency operating below awareness. Quantum manifestation enters this framework not as a technique but as an understanding. It suggests that influence over reality emerges when consciousness becomes less reactive and more coherent. Coherence, in this sense, is the alignment between thought, emotion, and perception. When these elements move in conflicting directions, the internal signal sent into experience is fragmented. When they align, experience reorganizes around a clearer internal signal. This alignment does not happen through force. It develops through awareness and repetition. Consciousness learns through exposure and emotional credibility. Ideas alone do not change reality. Embodied states do. A belief that is intellectually accepted but emotionally rejected has little influence. The nervous system follows what it feels repeatedly, not what it is told to accept. This explains why many people understand transformative concepts, yet continue to live unchanged lives. Reality from this perspective is responsive rather than obedient. It does not comply with demands or desires, but it mirrors coherence. When internal states stabilize, external circumstances often reorganize in subtle ways. Opportunities become noticeable where they were previously invisible. Choices emerge that were once inaccessible due to fear or hesitation. Interactions shift tone without deliberate effort. These changes feel organic rather than dramatic, which is why they are often overlooked. The illusion of separation between inner and outer worlds dissolves here. Experience is revealed as a continuous exchange between perception and circumstance. Consciousness shapes interpretation. Interpretation guides action, and action reinforces perception. This loop operates constantly, regardless of whether it is understood. Awareness simply allows it to be engaged intentionally, rather than unconsciously. In this light, manifestation is no longer about controlling outcomes. It is about refining the quality of consciousness from which outcomes arise. When attention becomes less fragmented and emotional states become less reactive, the internal environment stabilizes. Stability creates clarity, and clarity alters the field of possibilities available at any given moment. The future stops feeling like a threat and begins to feel like an extension of the present state. Understanding the quantum nature of reality does not remove uncertainty. Instead, it reframes it. Uncertainty becomes a space of potential rather than a source of anxiety. When consciousness is grounded, uncertainty no longer triggers defensive patterns. It becomes a neutral condition through which new configurations can emerge. This shift alone alters how life unfolds, not because reality has changed, but because the observer has. The essential idea remains simple yet demanding. Reality responds to coherence more than desire, to embodiment more than intention, and to awareness more than effort. Consciousness is not a passenger in life's movement. It is a silent partner, shaping the path through the state it sustains moment by moment. Reprogramming consciousness and internal identity. At some point, awareness begins to turn inward, not out of self-obsession, but out of necessity. When external circumstances repeat, despite different strategies, attention naturally shifts toward the internal patterns that remain unchanged. This is where the idea of reprogramming consciousness emerges, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived inquiry into identity itself. Identity, in this sense, is not defined by personality traits or social roles, but by the internal states that feel most familiar and therefore most real. Every individual carries an internal identity shaped by repetition. Emotional responses practiced over years become default reactions. Thoughts revisited daily transform into unquestioned truths. Over time, these patterns settle into a sense of self that feels stable, even when it is limiting. This internal identity quietly determines what feels possible, what feels threatening, and what feels undeserved. It does so without announcement, operating beneath conscious choice, guiding perception long before intention enters the picture. Reprogramming consciousness begins with recognizing that identity is not fixed, it is conditioned. The brain is designed to conserve energy, and it does so by automating familiar states. This automation is efficient, but it is not necessarily aligned with growth. When the nervous system associates safety with certain emotional patterns, even painful ones, it will return to them by default. The result is an internal consistency that shapes external experience, often mistaken for destiny. The difficulty lies in the fact that change requires stepping outside what feels known. The unfamiliar is often interpreted as unsafe, not because it is harmful, but because it lacks emotional precedent. This creates a paradox where the desire for transformation coexists with resistance to the very states that would enable it. Consciousness attempts to move forward while the body pulls backward, creating internal friction that drains energy and reinforces stagnation. Internal identity is reinforced through memory, but not memory as a record of events. Memory functions as a rehearsal of emotional states. Each time a memory is recalled, the associated emotion is reactivated, strengthening the neural pathways that support it. Over time, the past becomes less a series of events and more a recurring internal atmosphere. This atmosphere influences how present moments are interpreted, often before awareness has a chance to intervene. From this perspective, reprogramming consciousness involves altering the emotional landscape that defines identity. This does not require erasing the past or denying experience. It requires loosening identification with emotional patterns that no longer serve coherence. When consciousness observes an emotional state without merging with it, a subtle separation occurs. This separation creates space, and space allows choice to re-enter the system. Identity shifts when the internal environment changes. A person who consistently inhabits tension experiences the world as demanding. A person who consistently inhabits openness experiences the world as responsive. These differences are not philosophical preferences. They are embodied realities shaped by the nervous system's expectations. When internal states stabilize, perception recalibrates, and the external world appears to reorganize accordingly. Reprogramming does not occur through intellectual agreement alone. Understanding a concept does not automatically alter the emotional patterns that support identity. The nervous system responds to experience, not explanation. New states must be encountered repeatedly with enough emotional credibility to compete with established patterns. This process often feels uncomfortable, not because it is wrong, but because it disrupts familiarity. The transition between old and new identities is rarely dramatic. It unfolds gradually, through subtle shifts in reaction and interpretation. Moments that once triggered automatic responses begin to carry pauses. Within these pauses, awareness expands, and alternative responses become visible. Each pause weakens the grip of the old pattern and strengthens the emerging one. Over time, these micro-adjustments accumulate into a perceptible change in how life is experienced. Internal identity also governs expectations. Expectations act as filters, shaping what is noticed and what is dismissed. When expectations remain unchanged, experience appears predictable. When expectations soften, new possibilities enter awareness. This is not because reality has suddenly become generous, but because perception has become less constrained. Consciousness, when freed from rigid identity, perceives a broader spectrum of potential outcomes. The challenge of reprogramming lies in persistence without force. Forcing change often reinforces resistance, as the nervous system interprets pressure as threat. Gentle repetition, grounded awareness, and emotional honesty create conditions for sustainable transformation. Identity evolves not through rejection of what has been, but through integration and expansion beyond it. As consciousness gradually reorients, life begins to reflect this internal shift. Interactions carry different tones. Decisions feel less reactive and more intentional. Circumstances that once seemed obstructive lose their emotional charge. These changes are often subtle, yet they signify a profound reconfiguration of internal identity. The world responds not to who one wishes to be, but to who one consistently inhabits. Consciousness is programmable because it is patterned. Identity is not a prison, it is a habit. When habits change, identity follows, and when identity shifts, the experience of reality transforms with it, influencing events through emotional coherence. As consciousness begins to reorganize and internal identity slowly shifts, another layer of experience comes into focus. the relationship between emotional coherence and the events that unfold in daily life. What often appears as coincidence or external circumstance is deeply influenced by the emotional state that predominates beneath conscious awareness. Emotions are not merely reactions to events, they function as signals that shape perception, timing, and response. Over time, these signals influence which paths feel accessible and which remain unseen. Emotional coherence refers to the alignment between internal emotional states and the narratives the mind sustains. When emotions and interpretations move in opposing directions, experience becomes fragmented. A person may intellectually believe in expansion while emotionally bracing for loss. This internal contradiction creates tension that subtly influences behavior, often leading to cautious decisions, delayed actions, or avoidance disguised as patience. Events that follow tend to confirm the emotional expectation rather than the intellectual belief. The nervous system plays a central role in this dynamic. It continuously scans the environment for cues of safety or threat, shaping attention and reaction long before conscious thought intervenes. When emotional states are dominated by vigilance or urgency, the nervous system prioritizes short-term certainty over long-term coherence. This alters how situations are interpreted and which options are perceived as viable. Opportunities that require calm presence may go unnoticed, while scenarios that reinforce familiar tension receive disproportionate focus. Emotional coherence stabilizes this internal process. When emotions settle into consistency rather than fluctuation, perception becomes clearer. Clarity reduces impulsive reactions, allowing responses to emerge from awareness rather than habit. In this state, events feel less chaotic and more connected, not because unpredictability disappears, but because interpretation becomes less distorted by internal conflict. Influence over events does not imply control over outcomes. It describes a shift in how experience is engaged. When emotional coherence is present, decisions tend to align with long-term values rather than immediate relief. Interactions become less defensive and more responsive. This subtle recalibration affects the trajectory of events, as choices compound over time, shaping circumstances that reflect the underlying emotional tone. The idea that emotions influence reality is often misunderstood as emotional suppression or forced positivity. Coherence does not require the absence of discomfort, it requires integration. Discomfort acknowledged and processed does not destabilize coherence. Suppressed discomfort, however, creates internal dissonance that fragments awareness. When emotions are allowed to exist without defining identity, they lose their capacity to unconsciously direct behavior. This integration changes how challenges are experienced. Situations that once triggered immediate resistance may still evoke emotion, but the response carries less urgency. Without urgency, perception widens. Wider perception reveals alternatives that urgency obscures. This shift alters the flow of events, as responses become measured rather than reflexive. Over time, life appears less reactive, more responsive, and increasingly aligned with internal coherence. Emotional coherence also influences timing. Many experiences unfold according to readiness rather than desire. When internal states are inconsistent, timing feels misaligned. Efforts appear premature or delayed, often leading to frustration. As coherence stabilizes, timing becomes more intuitive. Decisions feel synchronized with circumstances rather than imposed upon them. This synchronization gives rise to experiences that feel meaningful rather than accidental. Relationships offer a clear illustration of this principle. Emotional states carried into interactions subtly shape dynamics. When coherence is absent, conversations are filtered through defensiveness or expectation, often reinforcing existing patterns. When coherence is present, interactions shift tone. Listening deepens, responses soften, and misunderstandings lose intensity. These changes influence relational outcomes, not through strategy, but through presence. External events respond to internal consistency in similar ways. Professional environments, creative pursuits, and personal projects all reflect the emotional quality invested in them. Coherent emotional states support sustained engagement, while fragmented states encourage cycles of enthusiasm and withdrawal. Over time, consistency produces results that appear externally driven, but are internally cultivated. Emotional coherence also alters the perception of uncertainty. Uncertainty often triggers anxiety when internal states are unstable. The mind seeks closure to relieve discomfort, sometimes at the expense of alignment. Coherence allows uncertainty to exist without immediate resolution. This tolerance creates space for events to unfold organically, often revealing outcomes that could not be forced through urgency. As emotional coherence deepens, the sense of separation between internal experience and external reality diminishes. Events feel less like interruptions and more like extensions of an ongoing process. This continuity reduces resistance, allowing adaptation without self-betrayal. Influence emerges not through manipulation, but through resonance between internal state and external circumstance. Events do not respond to isolated intentions, but to sustained emotional patterns. When emotions stabilize into coherence, life reorganizes around that stability. The influence exerted is subtle yet pervasive, shaping the flow of experience in ways that feel natural rather than contrived. Emotional coherence becomes the quiet architect of events, guiding outcomes through consistency rather than force. Living the new state and allowing reality to reorganize. As emotional coherence becomes more stable and internal identity continues to shift, life enters a quieter yet more demanding phase of transformation. This stage is not marked by dramatic breakthroughs or constant signs of progress. Instead, it reveals itself through subtle consistency, through the steady embodiment of a new internal state across ordinary moments. Reality begins to reorganize not because it has been commanded to change, but because the internal conditions that once sustained repetition are no longer dominant. Living the new state means inhabiting it beyond moments of clarity. It means carrying coherence into situations that previously triggered automatic reactions. This is where transformation is tested, not through grand challenges, but through routine interactions, small disappointments, and unremarkable delays. The nervous system, accustomed to familiar emotional patterns, initially resists this stabilization. It seeks intensity, urgency, or reassurance, attempting to pull awareness back into old rhythms. This resistance is not failure, it is evidence of transition. The human tendency to seek validation through external confirmation becomes particularly strong at this stage. When internal states change, the absence of immediate external reinforcement can feel unsettling. The mind may interpret this neutrality as stagnation, forgetting that stability itself is a new experience. Old patterns thrived on emotional fluctuation. The new state is quieter, less dramatic, and therefore easier to overlook. Yet it is precisely this quiet consistency that allows reality to shift organically. As internal states stabilize, perception changes. Attention moves away from monitoring outcomes and toward engagement with the present moment. This shift alters how opportunities are recognized. Instead of scanning the environment for signs of success or failure, awareness becomes more receptive to what naturally aligns. Decisions arise with less internal debate, guided by clarity rather than urgency. This clarity influences timing, allowing actions to occur when conditions support them, rather than when anxiety demands them. Reality reorganizes through accumulation rather than spectacle. Small choices compound, interactions subtly adjust, and circumstances gradually reflect the internal state being sustained. Relationships respond to presence rather than performance. Professional paths evolve through alignment rather than pressure. Creative pursuits deepen as resistance diminishes. These changes often appear ordinary, yet they represent a profound shift in how life is lived. The challenge during this phase lies in remaining anchored to the new state when old narratives attempt to resurface. Memory may present familiar stories of limitation, doubt, or urgency, inviting identification. The difference now is awareness. These narratives are recognized as echoes rather than commands. They arise, but they no longer define identity. This recognition preserves coherence, preventing regression without requiring suppression. Living the new state also involves a redefinition of effort. Effort driven by fear feels heavy and exhausting. Effort emerging from coherence feels focused and sustainable. The body responds differently to each. When actions align with internal stability, energy circulates more efficiently. Fatigue decreases, not because demands vanish, but because resistance lessens. This efficiency supports persistence, allowing engagement with life to continue without burnout. Another subtle shift occurs in the relationship with uncertainty. Previously, uncertainty may have triggered anxiety, leading to overanalysis or avoidance. In the new state, uncertainty is approached with curiosity rather than threat. It becomes a space of potential rather than a void to be filled. This change alters how future possibilities are imagined. Instead of projecting fear-based outcomes, awareness remains open, allowing experience to unfold without premature conclusions. Reality responds to this openness by presenting configurations that were previously inaccessible. These configurations are not always immediately recognizable as success. They may appear as invitations to refine boundaries, clarify values, or release attachments. Each invitation strengthens alignment, reinforcing the internal state that supports coherence. Over time, this alignment creates a feedback loop, where internal stability and external organization reinforce one another. Living the new state also affects how meaning is assigned to events. Challenges are no longer interpreted as personal failures or cosmic tests. They are understood as neutral occurrences within a larger process of reorganization. This perspective reduces emotional charge, allowing challenges to be addressed without self-judgment. The absence of self-judgment preserves coherence, preventing emotional fragmentation. As coherence becomes the default state, life feels less adversarial. This does not imply constant ease, but it does suggest a reduction in internal conflict. Decisions feel more congruent, actions feel more intentional, and outcomes feel more connected to internal values. Reality no longer feels like something to overcome, but something to engage with attentively. This chapter marks the transition from understanding to embodiment. Manifestation moves beyond concept and becomes a lived experience, expressed through presence rather than technique. Reality reorganizes because the internal conditions that once sustained repetition have dissolved. What emerges is not a perfected life, but a coherent one, where experience flows from alignment rather than resistance. The transformation described here does not announce completion. It remains dynamic, responsive, and ongoing. Yet within this movement lies a quiet certainty. When internal states are lived consistently, reality responds in kind, reshaping itself through resonance rather than force. When everything that has been explored is allowed to settle, a quiet understanding begins to emerge. Manifestation is not an event that happens once understanding is achieved, nor is it a reward granted for believing the right ideas. It is an ongoing relationship between consciousness and experience, shaped moment by moment by the internal state that is consistently lived. What appears externally as fate, coincidence, or luck often reveals itself as coherence sustained over time. Throughout this journey, one theme remains constant. Reality does not respond to effort alone, nor does it bend to desire in isolation. It responds to identity, to emotional stability, to the quality of awareness that meets each situation without fragmentation. When consciousness shifts from reactivity to presence, from tension to coherence, life reorganizes not dramatically, but meaningfully. Outcomes change because the observer changes, and perception alters the range of possibilities that can unfold. This understanding removes the pressure to force transformation. It replaces urgency with patience, control with alignment, and anxiety with attentiveness. Challenges no longer signal failure, they become information. Delays no longer imply rejection, they suggest recalibration. In this way, manifestation matures from a technique into a way of inhabiting life, grounded in clarity rather than expectation. What remains is not certainty about outcomes, but trust in process. Trust that when consciousness is lived with consistency, experience will reflect that consistency in forms both subtle and profound. The world does not need to be convinced. It needs to be met from a state that is stable, present, and coherent. From there, reality responds naturally, revealing paths that were invisible when awareness was divided. If your life is reflecting your internal state with precision, what version of yourself are you consistently living as right now? If this reflection resonated with you, subscribe to the channel to continue exploring consciousness, manifestation, and inner transformation with depth and clarity. Stay with us on the final screen and continue watching, allowing these ideas to unfold further as the journey continues.